thank you for taking this time early in the morning to be here. We've known each other forever.
Yes, we have.
Both of us are ex-military.
Right.
But you were an officer in the military, weren't you?
Yes.
What were you?
Marine captain.
Marine captain?
Yep.
Well, how long did you stay in?
5 years.
5 years. And you're just a little bit older than me.
Just a little bit. Well, I'm not sure if that's true.
I think you know it. Come on. Okay.
Well, I've got more white hair than you have, so maybe I'm a little bit older. So it's.
Well, listen, where were you born?
March 30th, 1947.
Okay.
So I'm 76.
You're 76?
Yes.
Okay.
A young 76. People say I don't look a day over 74.
Where were you born?
Elmira, New York.
New York. Okay. Did you grow up there all your life?
No.
I mean, all your adolescent life?
I was raised in West Virginia up to the age of about 5.
Wait, so you were born in New York and then you moved, your parents?
No, my family was having problems, and so I was sent to live with my great aunt and great uncle, Aunt Ruby.
At what age?
Was that?
At what age? From birth?
From about 2.
Okay.
I believe, and so I have early memories from 8, 9 months old. They confirmed by my mother that I riding down the street in Manhattan, New York, in a car.
And how old were you?
8 or 9 months old.
Now, wait, you started walking when?
I started walking at 8 months.
Really?
Yes.
You're one of those kind of kids. I always knew there was something special about you. Wait just a minute. Really? So you ran away when you were around 9 months?
Well, I didn't run away.
In your diapers and everything? I think it followed the trail?
Yeah. No, it was funny. That's the earliest memory I have, and I was riding in the front seat of a big black car in 1947. All cars were black,
right.
So, and I asked my mother one time, did I have that experience? She says, I didn't know what it was, and she says, oh, and my mother didn't think anything of it. She says, no, yeah, that was so and so, and you went for a ride in the car. And so she confirmed it. Otherwise, I would think it was just a memory that I might have had. But,
right.
And then the next earliest memory is in West Virginia, picking eggs. And I was
what?
Picking eggs.
Okay.
You know, as a child, every child in a subsistence farm, there were 92 acres, and 92 acres, most of the cows had one leg longer than the other, because they was always walking on the sides of hills. So this
is real.
No, I'm joking.
I thought you were joking. What are you talking about? Okay, so this is going to be a hard one, you guys, because I don't know. You're going to have to take half of it as real, half of it is, you find out.
Well, anyway.
Luckily, we're in the age of the internet, so we can check.
But I was actually, I always say that I was raised in the 19th century, because we had well water. And there was a big iron stove that today would cost about $100,000. In those days, it was a sign of poverty, and it was long, and on the side of it, and it was wood burning stove, and there was a big pot which built into the stove, which heated the water for taking showers and stuff. And you took a shower in a thing like this.
So you remember all?
Oh, I remember as clear as a bell.
So how long did you stay with
I can remember everything that I did when I was 4 or 5 years old, but I can't remember anything I did yesterday. So
thank goodness for good memory when you're a child.
Yes.
Listen, so you were raised by your aunt and uncle?
My great aunt and great uncle, Aunt Ruby and Uncle Ellywood.
Was this on your mother's side?
My mother's side. Everything is on my mother's side. Okay. And
did you know your father?
Well, my father is Larry Murphy. He adopted me when I was about 5 years old.
Okay.
And so I've always considered him my father.
Okay. So you didn't know your biological father?
No, I didn't know my biological father. Mm-hmm. And we may wind up talking about that anyhow.
We might have. Anyway. But so you have siblings, you said, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
I've got 7 siblings.
Wow.
And
now let's go into the children part. Do you have you also have children, don't you?
I have 2 children, Elisa and Scott.
I don't think I taught Scott. Did I teach Scott?
You taught Elisa and Scott. They both went to Nishimachi.
They sure did. So they both went in the gymnastics program.
They went Nishimashi through kindergarten through ninth grade,
Right.
and then they went to ASIJ.
That's right.
And
Because I remember you used to come in. I remember you coming to pick them up. Yes.
yeah,
I remember
and
that.
so it was.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think anybody that's been interviewed by you that's been here longer than a few years has probably had their children be taught by you. I've always admired your program.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Tell me this, Kyle. What kind of child were you? Were you more academic or were you more physical?
I'd like to think I was both. You know, in schoolyard when we go out for recess and stuff like that, we would always divide up teams, and I was never the last, so I had to be a little bit academic.
Okay.
I was never the first either, but
Okay, right.
so you know, if you can remember back to when you were in elementary school, that sort of thing, and academic. You know, it's funny. I was a lazy student and always have been a lazy student. And but when you're coming up to a test or something like that, I have a tendency to study very hard, and I can remember everything for the week of the test, and then I forget everything. So it's
Is that right?
no, I'm joking, but
Okay.
it's that's sort of the situation. Is I'm in when I was in elementary school. I did not learn to read phonetically. You did sight reading.
Right.
You know, water was water. It was not water.
I understand.
And so when I read, I've always been a great reader, but I don't necessarily know how to pronounce the words.
I understand because you didn't learn phonetically.
So what I do is I just, whenever I see a word that I don't know, I look it up, find out what it means first, and then I assign a value for it, and that's how I
A value.
a value. Well, that word every time I see it, that's X. It's not whatever it is. It's just so that I can read it. So when I read it, that didn't slow me down. So
Gotcha.
that sort of thing like that. And
What were the subjects you were really interested in?
history.
Elementary.
History is
In
my favorite.
elementary too? You really enjoyed
I
history?
think I've always been interested in history.
Okay.
And,
What type of history?
basically American history, and then later on world history. And then when in high school, I first discovered Buddhism, and I was interested in Buddhism. But in Kingston, New York, which is where I went to high school, we had to write a senior thesis, and I wrote it on Buddhism.
Okay.
And but I ran out.
Was it rare basically for the other kids? I mean, did you have anyone else that was into Buddhism?
Well, I wasn't into Buddhism. I was interesed in
You were
Buddhism.
interested in did you have other people? It was a pretty big
Not to
interest
my
at that time?
knowledge. Maybe
Because
they were.
you grew up in the hippie time. Don't forget, you're a hippie. You're my brother's age. So you guys starting free love and all this, and everybody love each other, and Rainbow Coalition. Not the same rainbow we know now. It was different then. It was just the rainbow of people at that time. You remember?
Yeah, well, it
That's
was,
what it was.
where I grew up. When I was a child, we still had segregation,
Right.
and I lived in West Virginia, and we would go to church, and the church was we go to church, and black people were in the church, white people in the church. The white people sat on the left side of the church, and the black people sat on the right side of the church.
But this was so they went to the same church.
Same church in this is in West. This is my experience.
So you
anyhow.
remember that? Okay, yes.
That's my experience, and we usually walked to the church because we didn't have a car, and I love talking about West Virginia because it was such a wonderful experience for me, and I think about it all the time.
Okay.
As I said, I was raised in the 19th century. We didn't have running water, we didn't have electric heat or central heating.
But that was the case for the majority of the people around you.
Yes, we
Right,
were.
that's
We
not-
were. We were. I was raised. For people who know West Virginia, I was raised in Marlington, Virginia, and we were in the town of Lobelia. In 1950, the population of Lobelia was 9 people, and we lived outside of town. And the
Are you
nearest.
sure The population was 9 people. Are you serious?
That was serious.
50.
1950. There was a population. There was nobody living there. It was just a crossroads. And then we lived about maybe a mile, 2 miles up a little. They were called hollers. Little narrow and and so my Aunt Ruby. I, I I love talking about this, but my Aunt Ruby, she gave me a great deal of freedom, and so she would say, "Now, Kyle," says, "you don't go beyond those rocks up there, because there was rocks up in the back, and I could play up there. And you don't go beyond those rocks. There's bears." And that's how she kept me in control. She says, and then about every 15, 20 minutes, she would yell, "Kyle," and I had to go out and show myself.
Right. Okay.
And that was her way of controlling me without me feeling I was being
This
controlled.
is your aunt.
My Aunt Ruby.
Your great aunt?
My great aunt.
Great-aunt.
Was my
Mother's aunt.
grandfather's sister,
Okay.
and his elder sister. He was what? It was maybe 9 people.
Now, you were mostly
brothers and
playing
sisters.
by yourself, or did you have friends around you, or was it just you?
Well, I mean, I was the 12th of 11 children,
Okay.
and I was being raised, and so the different uh, brothers and sisters would come with their children. I'd play with them, and over the top of the hill, on the other side of the hill, there was another family. It was a good mile away, but those are my closest friends, and I played with um, the geese and the guinea hens, and the
Now,
guinea.
you're being serious now.
I'm being very
Okay,
serious.
okay. I just want to
And
know.
guinea hens the geese were guard geese, and if you got them angry, they would chase you. I remember a little boy being scared, and Grease is coming up with his arms in the air, and so it was. So I had like I said, I lived in the 19th century, because we did have electricity, but just barely, a few lights and anything. And I remember in the morning we'd listen to on Saturdays, we listened to the Grand Ole Opry and things like this,
Yes,
And so,
yes.
and then my mother brought me back to upstate New York when I was.
After how many years?
Well, I was going into kindergarten in the first grade.
So you're talking about times prior to you even going to school,
Yeah, I'm talking about
and you're
5 years
playing.
old.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh.
and
So
any
what about the winter times? Because it got cold up here in Virginia now.
well, and I can remember snow, and we
Yes.
would go out and get fresh snow, and we would put food coloring on it, and we'd eat it as
Okay.
like in Japan. We have what I can't think what they're called, but we grind ice.
Right.
That's the same idea,
Same with
and
me.
but we didn't do it that way, and the water came from a well or spring, actually a spring,
Right.
and that spring also was where they canned everything, and so I've always said that the one book I buy, if I had only one book I could buy, I would buy the Reader's Digest Guide to I think it's survival,
Yes.
and it gives you basic ideas on how to do canning and how to do building a house and stuff like that. So it's I'm far from that now, living in Asia.
Right.
But my initial interest in Asia came from doing that study on Buddhism.
Okay.
And
That's when you were in high school and you
in
wrote
high
your
school,
thesis,
yeah.
right?
And then I went to Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland. And you asked if I was a good student. The answer is no. And I played intramural softball, which
When you're in high school?
no I played fast pitch softball in university.
Okay, what'd you do in high school?
High school,
Or was
I
that like
had a heartworm, and so I only did shot put and javelin.
so? Okay, so you found that you had a medical condition when?
In high school, I wasn't. Well, I don't think I had a medical condition, but
Right.
they wouldn't let me play football,
Right.
which is probably the best thing that ever happened because I
They may not
didn't.
let you into the Marines.
Well, no, and then I was in university for 2 years in Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland, and I was a terrible student. And I discovered I discovered bridge. I discovered I discovered the opposite sex, and I didn't have time for study. I also studied. I also discovered the theater. I love the theater, and
You discovered bridge, the game bridge,
right.
the theater, and the opposite sex.
Yes, those.
Okay.
I was pretty busy, you know. I
Your plate was full.
I didn't
Your
have
plate was
time for
full.
study, you know. And the school agreed with that. So, and at the end of the night, and
That's why you only stayed in 2 years, because it should have been
I was
4.
being kicked out, and
Okay.
I got kicked out, and it took me years to admit that. But
Right.
so it's I knew in 1967 in the spring semester that I was failing,
Right.
and I honestly didn't care. And so I went down to all the recruiting people, and so the first time I just went and looked at them and took some, and then my father came down, picked me up, and he says they've asked you not to return, and
The recruiting office asked you not to return.
no the
Oh, the school. Oh, this when you find out the school didn't
yeah,
want you to return.
yes,
Okay.
and so I went back to Kingston, which is where my family was living, and I was working as a bartender in the
Now, how old are
British.
you now? 18, 19?
I was 18 years old. Because I turned 18 in 65, and then I was working as a bartender at the Bridge Circle Inn, and Joe, the Espositos, and that was also the state troopers came in there and ate,
Okay.
and so I could not pour beer fast enough, and so I was in there for and so I had at the meantime I was talking to the different branches of service, and I went to the Army and they offered me such and such. Then I went to the Navy and they offered me such and such. I didn't even really want to go to the Air Force, but I did it just as a courtesy, you know. Sorry, I'm sorry, and
And then the Air Force. Nobody.
well, I didn't go to the. I have a friend that's in the Coast Guard, and we have all kinds of complaints about that. And so then, at the last minute, it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the Marine. I said, "Well, there's the Marines. Let me go talk to them." And it was a man named Gunny Sergeant Claypool. You remember these things, you know. I'm sure you remember your recruiter as well, and. And he was coming down the stairs, and I was going up. And I says, "Oh, I says you're closing. Okay, I'll come back." No. Turn around. He saw. He had me on a hook, so he'd bring me in. He's reeling me in. So he came up and he says, "I says, well, I'd like to join the Marine Corps. I'm thinking about joining the Marine Corps." And I says, "I want to go to language school, and I would like to go to language school. So I heard the military had a language school. I said, I'd like to go to." I'd like to save $10,000, so I want to go back to school, and I'd like to become an officer. Oh, all these things are possible. All these things are possible. You know, did I ever know how difficult it was those things to do? But none, so I said, oh, I sign on line. so,
But you did become an officer,
yeah,
and you did finish school. You had to finish school to become an officer.
No, they. In 1967,
Okay.
the Marine Corps was losing 5 to 10 second lieutenants a week
In
in
Vietnam. Oh, yes.
and so
Oh,
and so people were not really volunteering for the Marine Corps.
because there would be a second lieutenant sent right over there. But a lot of the people weren't just killed by Viet Cong.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Some were being taken out by their own people.
Well, I've got a story about
You're
that,
right.
but it's not me, but
Okay.
our Rexo, and he wasn't popular.
Wow.
And one day he woke up and he got up. Fortunately, he looked. There was a hand grenade they put on his door, so when he opened the door, it would
Nice.
go off. And, but it didn't. So fortunately, but that's
But
the one story.
they were really planning to. It just didn't.
They
tried.
tried to kill him, and he wasn't a bad man, but just somebody didn't like him, and
Okay.
so it was. But that's a different story.
That's another story.
And,
So go on. So you get in.
So I went to Paris Island in July. I went
Basic
to
training.
basic training.
Is it 8 weeks?
No, at that time it was 10 weeks.
10 weeks, okay.
Paris Island. And during that time, because I had 2 years of university, and I interviewed. I took tests to see if I could be qualified to go to. It was called the ESEP, Enlisted Commissioning Program. And so I went to. I took the tests, and then from there I went to Camp Lejeune, and which is a sort of a source of a lawsuit these days. But and so I'm in the middle of that. And the
You mean you are actually have them?
no, I've
You mean it's, because it's a group of people? So it's a what is it? What do they call it when they have a
the
lawsuit?
pack law.
Right, right.
Well, I'm involved.
So you're part of that,
Yeah,
right?
and so
Okay.
and so so the I went to Paris Island, and then I went to Camp Lejeune to advanced infantry training, and it was we had a guy in our we knew what our MOS is, and I was a 2500.
Which is
He's a communications guy. So if I had stayed enlisted, I would have gone to Paris. I would have gone to Vietnam in about January of 1968. And if you know what happened in February, it was Tet.
that's right.
And so
Offensive.
in
Right.
Vietnam, the first two people they shot at was the guy with the big antenna on the back of his
Of
head,
course, that's
and the
right.
guy who's sitting next to him because he was a second lieutenant.
Right.
So what I did was I managed to go from being the guy with the carrying the
Communication.
communication thing
Right.
to being the second
Second
lieutenant. So I got shot second instead of first.
Right. But did you actually get shot?
No,
Okay. Okay.
I'm just joking about that, and the so I waited around at Camp Lejeune. I was a gate guard for about 2 months, and so I spent a total of 4 or 5 months at Camp Geiger, which is part of Camp Lejeune, and so to be qualified for that lawsuit, you had to be there a month. So I spent 4 or 5 months there, and then I went to Quantico for OCS, and that's what OCS is 8 or 10 weeks, and then from there you're commissioned. And then you stay in Quantico, but you go to camp. What's that called? Camp. I think it's Camp Upshaw, and it's there you go 6 months of the basic school, which is how you become a second lieutenant. And then from there, I went to my OCS, my MOS, I'm sorry, was as a artilleryman. So then I was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, for artillery training. And then at that time, they called me. The colonel called me, and there was 4 people, and there was 3 slots. They always do it this way, And so,
Right.
and there were 3 slots in the Defense Language Institute. One Thai, North Vietnamese, and South Vietnamese. And so it says, you can think about it if you want to do it. And I said, sir, I'd like to go to Thai language school. And so because I had the highest grades in language aptitude, then I got the first choice. And then my friend became he was a Vietnamese linguist. And so then I went to Thai language school for a year. 5 days a week, 7 hours a day for 1 year. And so then I came out of there, then I went to intelligence schools, and then I went back to Camp Lejeune as an artillery officer. And then they sent me to Camp Garcia, Villegas, Puerto Rico, which is, I was the S3, that's the operations officer in Camp Lejeune, at Camp Garcia. And there the most beautiful beaches in the Caribbean, untouched. And it's now resorts because they fought to get they took it back, and now that it's a gorgeous place. And so I was there for 6 months, and so I went up to headquarters Marine Corps, and I talked to the person's called a detailer, and these are the officers responsible for assigning you places. And so I said I'd like to go to Vietnam. And, I was a gung-ho Marine those days. So it's,
So you really wanted to go?
yeah, I asked to go. And so he says, when do you want to go? And October or November. I said, October's fine. And so it's funny is because I had orders directly into Vietnam. And all the Vietnamese linguists only got as far as Okinawa. It was strange. So they sent the Thai linguists to Vietnam, and all the Vietnamese linguists they left in Okinawa. It didn't make any sense. But there's a lot of things about the military that didn't make any sense. And so I was in Vietnam for about 4 or 5 months, and I was an advisor to the Vietnamese Army. And it wasn't a very heavy-duty time that time.
Mm-hmm. What year was this?
I never got shot at.
What year was this?
71. 71, I'm sorry.
71. Okay.
It was started out in 70, and it was and then 71.
Okay.
And but I never got shot at. We got mortared a few times and things like that. But I fell into the bomb shelter one time and hurt my finger. I said, "Does that qualify for Purple Heart?" And he said, "No, I don't think so." And so then we pulled out of Vietnam, and I went back to Okinawa, and I was in Okinawa for until February 28, 1972. I decided I wanted to stay in Asia because Vietnam was probably one of the most beautiful places I'd seen, and I flew AO a couple times in the back seat of them because I was an artillery officer, and so we'd fly over the countryside, and it was just it's an incredibly beautiful place. And I think you've been there, haven't you?
No, not yet. No.
So then I was in Japan at Sophia.
Wait, no. Wait, you woke up one morning and all of a sudden, wait just a minute, you just in Japan.
Well, I jump around a lot. You gotta stick with me,
Wait,
as a friend used to say.
So while you were there in Vietnam, they take you out around 71.
No, I went back. I came out of in probably in April of 71,
Okay.
and I was at.
And you put in to stay into Asia, and then they gave you Japan.
No, they sent me to Okinawa.
Well,
That's
still
where
Japan.
the 3rd Marine Division was
Okay.
there, and
The base there, yes.
and so I was there until February, and then in the meantime I got accepted by Sophia in Tokyo.
So you knew that you were going to get it. How long had you been in the service?
At that point, and when I got out of the Marine Corps, I was in 4 years, 10 months, and 28 days.
Okay.
I know exactly how long.
And you got out while you were in Okinawa.
No, I went back to Pendleton, got out, and then I flew back to Okinawa.
No, but I mean, your time, you knew you were going to get out, so you had to be discharged in Pendleton, but still you were
Yeah,
finished.
I came back,
That's what I'm saying,
and then
yes. So you're going
I'm one of the few people who came to Japan on a boat.
When you came back the next time?
I
or
went
the
back
first
to
time?
Okinawa and took the ferry from Okinawa to Harumi.
Is that right?
Yeah, and so I'm one of the few people who came to Japan on a boat. So I said,
Okay.
and and then I got to Harumi, and I was a real babe in the woods. I only had American money, and
Because they hadn't changed the system in Okinawa yet. Everything was still in dollars in Okinawa. I think they changed 75, I think, is when they flipped it or something.
Yeah, well,
and they were driving on our side of the street and everything. It was just like a U.S. territory. It was all us.
Yeah, it's well, they were still using script,
That's
when
right.
I was there, and so I got to Tokyo. I had no money. Didn't know where to stay, and so I wound up in. I got some guy gave me exchanged some dollars for yen.
Was it 410 at that time?
No, it was 360.
360,
But I
okay,
think he
right.
probably gave me 100 yen to $1. I mean, it was. He
saw you coming?
He saw me coming, boy, I tell you. And so I got in a taxi, and I had been told about a youth hostel in Ichigaya.
Okay.
And so I went over there, and I didn't realize you had to have a reservation. So I showed up with my bag, everything, and they said, "No, you can't stay here." And so I said, "Where the hell am I going to go?" And because I didn't have a lot of,
Now this is 72?
it's 72, yes.
72, okay.
And
That was
so,
your first time on the main island, on Honshu,
well, it
here.
was the second time because I flew up to Yokota to talk
To
to
Okinawa.
Sophia
Oh, while you were in Okinawa,
yeah,
you took a hop
to
over
get
to.
to get up to get into Sophia because you had to have a student visa, and so you
Okay,
had to have all kinds of documents.
right.
And so then that student visa story is funny because I didn't know what to do. So I went to the immigration office in Tokyo, not the where people go, but
Right.
the actual major central administration of the immigration. And I talked to somebody. And so I went back to Okinawa, submitted my documents. They says, "You'll never get this approved in time." And but because I had talked to somebody when my application came in, they accelerated back. So
You lucked out.
it's
Yeah.
well, it teaches you something about in Japan. If you just let things happen, nothing happens. You have to you don't have to be abusive. You just have to keep things moving forward. So now I'm in youth hostel. Sent me to this place in Shinjuku, and and a lot of people were staying there. It was very cheap, and every night there was a little old man. He must have been 100 years old. He would come around with a little bell. He's ringing the bell and says, "It is now 8 o'clock. It is time to go to bed." They would lock the door, and if you weren't back in by 8 o'clock, you
You
couldn't get
couldn't
in.
get in. Right.
And
Right. Those
and
were the days. I mean, everything was closed
yeah,
except for snack.
that's exactly
You could
right.
go to a place to snack, and smoking was everywhere.
Everywhere. It was horrible. It
Everybody
was
smoked.
absolutely. It was terrible. It
You
was
went to the
truly.
movie theater, you'd hope that you wouldn't be sitting behind somebody that was going to be smoking because you couldn't see the screen then
Yeah,
because they'd
I
be
know.
smoking all
I
the
can
time.
remember very clearly. I can
Oh,
remember very clearly. And so there's many times that I have to wind up staying in. Basically, it was an all-night kisa. A kisa tent that's open all night, and you couldn't officially go to sleep. You couldn't lay down. Which you fall. You could sleep with your eyes sitting up. And it was several times I did that over the years, and so then I needed to find a place to live. I had no idea how to do that. And so my idea about how to do it was ride the trains and look out the window and you see an empty apartment, go see if you could find it.
and that's what you did?
That was my initial. That wasn't working, and so
Okay.
and finally I was at Sophia. At that time it was a night school, and so I was
It
at
was a
Sophia.
night school.
Yeah, it was only the classes were
Oh,
only
so,
at
it
night,
was night school. I said
only at
yes.
nighttime, and later on it changed.
It was only nighttime for foreigners, for the
Yeah, there
foreigners.
was an
Yes, right.
international school.
That's right.
That was the way Sophia made their money.
And they had a separate campus too. They weren't on the
No,
main.
and
It was,
not in
it
the
was
big,
still on the
not
main
in the
campus.
main campus.
That's
When
right.
they moved to the separate campus to
That's right.
Ichigaya, it
Ichikawa.
improved greatly.
Right. And then that was really for foreigners.
Yeah,
The
well,
Ichikawa campus had more
then
foreigners in it.
they evolved it into the international college,
Right.
and there were both Japanese and foreigners. I was walked around the hallway, and I says, "Does anybody know where our apartment is?" or something like that. That's what I was asking. And there was this guy, his name Len Davis, and I can remember as clear as a bell.
Glenn Davis?
Len, no, not
Okay, no,
Glenn,
okay,
not
because I
Glenn.
thought
Glenn's
you
a
meant,
different.
yeah,
Glenn's my good buddy.
that's right.
But Len Davis, his name, and
Right.
he'd been a captain in the army, and he'd been in Vietnam. He'd been badly shot up, and he was a highly decorated individual. And and so I started talking to him, and having been a Marine captain, he having been an Army captain, there was a simpatico type of thing. And I said, "Do you know any apartments?" He says, "I think my wife, his wife's name, I think was Maki. Maki knows someplace." And so I wound up in Kawasaki on the Odakusen in a town called, oh, gee, I can't remember the name. It's Tamaku of Kawasaki, in a beautiful small uh, six tatami room and an eight tatami kitchen. but it sat up on a hill, and you looked down at beautiful rice fields all through the field. It was a lovely place, and I would never have been able to get in there if his wife had not recommended me. And the people's names were Watanabe. I had no telephone, and but they were really nice people. A few years ago, I went back and tried to find it. The whole area is so different now than it was then, because there's now a train line that goes out from Shinjuku station, which didn't exist at that time, and out there, and so it's been built up incredibly at Tama area, and so I lived there for 4 years, and I got my bachelor's degrees in Japanese history from Sophia, and taught English, and made my money, build my money up. Oh, by the way, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I did have $10,000.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I
So
said,
you had that, you became an officer. And what else did you want?
I'll become an officer. I wanted to be go to language school,
So,
and
and you $10,000, and you did it.
and so
Wow.
mainly because when I went back to one of the reasons I didn't like university the first time was my parents were paying for everything, and my family is not a rich family. And even though it's not like the outrageous prices it is today,
It was
they were
for that time.
it was reasonable. And so, but I didn't want them to do that. I wanted to do it myself, and I think it's part of your maturation process or whatever. And so, in 1976, I was still in school, sort of, but I was basically just teaching English. And I met my future wife, and in Seijo Gakuin. And she was walking down the street. I started talking to her, and she actually had an umbrella, and it was raining, so she's offered me an umbrella. We talked only in Japanese, and then I went to the family I was teaching English to, he was a really senior Japanese politician, and they looked her up, and so I called up her home the next day, and her mother says she's at work, so I called her office, and that's the first time she spoke English to me. She spoke, "Oh, you're such a detective. How'd you find me?" And I said to her, I says, "Well, if you go out to dinner with me, I'll tell you." And so I started going out with her, and so I wouldn't tell her how I found out until so I just kept having dates. And so I don't think I was anybody's first choice for a husband, but any rate.
2 children later.
And so
Yeah.
I went to Purdue, and because I realized I needed some business experience background, and I was in the same apartment that I lived in. There was downstairs. There was a guy named Chuck Johnson, who worked for Fuji National Consulting, and he became a very good friend. And he was a Navy officer, and it's funny. Veterans have a tendency to be friends with veterans.
Isn't that the truth?
And
because we have a common experience, and that is, first of all, basic training, and that's when you really do become who you're going to be.
And
you
so,
find out.
Yeah, that's right. And so I spent a year and a half of basic training. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably a slow learner, but and
you
so
did.
I applied to 7 or 8 universities, and the only one that turned me down was University of Michigan. So I've always had a negative feeling towards Michigan. But the other schools, I managed to get into some good schools, and I decided to go to Purdue, mainly because I could afford Purdue. No one offered me money, but I could afford Purdue.
Weren't you going to use the GI Bill as well?
I did use the GI,
That's what I
but
thought, yes.
that was with the GI Bill. And at that time, they had increased it, so it's $450 a month or something like that. And so Purdue they had a 1-year program. It was the fastest. And also, that's a program I got for. The other thing was that Purdue answered all my questions with personal letters.
Oh,
And so it was a great school. I have no regrets about going there. So I was there, and then I went to work for SmithKline in New York. They sent me back to they.
You're married during this time.
What's that?
You're married during this time.
Yeah, well, I graduated from university.
Right.
My wife and I were there, and then we moved to Philadelphia, and I was in the SmithKline management training program.
Right.
So I was did market research, then I was finance, and then I carried a bag as a salesman
Right.
in Washington, D.C. I was the only white guy walking down the streets because I was in Northeast Washington. And everyone says, oh, it's so dangerous, but no one ever bothered me.
Mm-hmm.
No one, because I belonged there. And people come up and ask me, what you got in the bag? And I said, want to take a look? And they knew the drugs better than I did. But they were really nice people. And all the doctors and nurses, they loved to see me there because I had Thorazine. And Thorazine is it's a psychotic drug.
Mm.
And they says, can you give us a 5 milligram injectable of Thorazine? And so I would get them, each one of these doctors had one because they'd get people coming crazy. And that's the only way they could put them down without hurting them. They just knock them out, go to sleep for a couple hours. So that was a very good experience.
Are you retired now?
Well, COVID retired me.
Okay.
Mainly,
what were you doing prior to that?
Well, I was in the U.S. Embassy, ran the trade talks in healthcare in the 80s, and I based and built my business on that because I met everybody.
Right.
So I work with medical devices, diagnostics, and pharmaceutical drugs, introducing them into Japan or out licensed Japan.
Right.
And I also work with scientific instruments. I did that from 1988 to today.
I remember when you tried to get into my business.
Yeah, we were talking about it. You came to my office
and you had to back my Jaguar into a pole. But I remember that.
Well, that was your own fault.
I said,
that pole was there, you know.
I come over to his office, and I remember him sitting down there, and he started asking me how I was doing this medical equipment business, the CT scanners, because nobody else was doing it. And I'd become, at that time, probably the largest in Japan buying new CT scanners. So Kyle's sitting up there thinking that I'm going to give him all this information, like where I get it from this. That's this guy, and he had a staff of about 5 or 6 people in his office.
Oh,
and
that's
I said,
not
yep.
True.
So when I didn't give him anything, he said, back up like this. And the pole was low enough for him to see it, but I couldn't. And I backed my Jaguar, brand new Jaguar, by the way, into the back of that.
This is revisionist history. It's revisionist history. It didn't happen that way. He was just so anxious to get out of there, he backed up by mistake. He didn't even know I was there. So.
But listen, Kyle, if you could go back in time with all the information you have now and meet the younger Kyle, how old would he be and what advice would you give him?
I've thought about that. Actually, I've thought about that quite a bit. If I were to do it over again, everything would be probably pretty much the same to 1988. When I joined the embassy. I was recruited into the embassy, and I wanted to be a consultant. I wanted to be a person when people would look to get something done in Japan, and I didn't know it was going to be medical at the time. I wanted to be a person who that when they were looking for someone to help them in Japan, I'd be one of the top 3 names that came up. That was my goal. And so I joined the embassy. I had a good run. And
how long was it? How long were you in?
It's 4 years. From October of 84 to August.
Who was the ambassador?
Ambassador Mansfield.
Oh,
I worked directly for him.
You couldn't have had a better time.
One of my most valuable memories, when I was leaving, you could go up to his office on Saturday morning. He was always, and you could just walk in. So I had gotten one of his promotional pictures of him. And so I walked into his office, and he considered me one of his boys. And I said, Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to be leaving the embassy. Would you sign this for me? And he had a standard signature, a standard thing he wrote. And so I said, you've often called me in different meetings our bulldog on the issue. Could you include that in the sign? He looked at me and smiled, and so he did. And so that picture is hanging on my wall. It's been hanging there for years, and it was.
But he was loved by the Japanese, and his wife was Japanese.
Well, his wife went to school in Des Moines, Iowa, and one of her teachers was a woman named Sister Dorita. She had 2 PhDs, and she was one of my teachers at Sophia, and she was the one that wrote my recommendations for university in graduate school.
The same teacher she had.
Same teacher she had, and so she came to. The reason I know that, she says, because every year she would go up and have tea with Maureen.
It was my understanding that Ambassador in Mansfield was fluent in Japanese.
I don't know.
But he would never ever speak whenever he went in Japanese.
What was interesting about him, he was a Marine, he was Army, and he was Navy. He served in
all three.
All three. And
he missed during the Korean War?
No. He was in China, I think.
Okay.
And so he was truly an amazing man. And
but you didn't get to the part. What would you tell yourself at that time? Because you're still young. You're going back in time.
Well, the embassy wanted me to stay, and I could have made a career as a diplomat. But because I had this dream, I couldn't get it out of my head. I left, and if I had stayed, I could have spent a tour in Thailand, a tour in Europe, and come back to Japan whenever, probably almost whenever I wanted to. But I didn't. And I've often wondered what would have happened if I had done it that way.
So you might have whispered in your incense.
Well, I tell you one thing, maybe my hair would still be salt and pepper like yours. And
Kyle, look, I want to thank you so much for taking this time.
I enjoyed it very much.
Really appreciate it. I want to thank all of you for watching this podcast. Make sure you press like and subscribe. And never forget, it's all on loan. So continue to reach for the stars.
Because you're too blessed to be stressed.